Yeah, so my primary role when I was down there was to try and figure out how we could mobilise New Zealand businesses to support the government's effort in response to the virus.
Right.
So it wasn't so much focused on how we get business up and running again. At that point, we'd locked the country down. And one of the issues that businesses were finding is there are a heap of people out there with resources and ideas and capability to support the government, but they had no way in to kind of connect with anyone to
Right.
figure out how they could add value. So, for example, we had the team at Zuru Toys saying to me, look, they've got 5,000 employees in China on the ground. We were needing to source personal protective equipment for the hospitals and so on. And they were saying, look, we've got people on the ground in China that can go and evaluate factories, they can get product tested and so on. And no one at that point could jump on a plane and fly it there, right? We had everything locked down, and it was locked down at the China end. So they were prepared to go and source all this product for the New Zealand government. Government doesn't really move very fast, right? That's not in government's nature. So I said, well, you'll need to give me an opportunity to go and get some budget signed off. They said, look, we'll just buy it. We'll spend our money. We'll buy it. We'll figure out later on kind of how the government, can reimburse us for the costs of this. And we got a job done in a couple of weeks that probably would have otherwise taken a couple of months. And so it was that type of thing. I was looking to say, government's good at some things, but they can't necessarily move at speed. They're not necessarily good at taking risk and innovating. So, my focus was saying, how can I put government and business together to accelerate some things, to amplify some things, to achieve things that otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve with government just left to its own devices.
Out of interest, when you said we'll just buy it, who's the we'll? Who went out and bought the PPE?
So, and there are a number of companies I work with, but in that instance, Zuru spent several $1 million of their own money just saying, we'll just fund it, we'll just buy it. And we trust basically that I'd figure out with Grant Robertson how at some point they could be reimbursed for that. Stephen Tyndall in the warehouse did the same thing. Stephen Tyndall, in fact, underwrote an order of 50 ICU ventilators because we didn't have enough ICU beds in New Zealand. I think the value of that was $3 or $4 million. He said, look, I'll just underwrite that. Let's get the order in place and we'll figure out downstream, how that gets recompensed. So these guys were putting their own money and, quite frankly, their balls on the line to just say, we'll do what needs to be done and let's worry about the detail later on.
It's probably amazing as well, just purely because we're talking about economies of scale again. I mean, that one individual, Sir Stephen Tyndall, can underwrite, ventilators, which probably was enough to help the country. Whereas you look to a place like America, and obviously it's a much bigger story than just not enough ventilators if you look what's going on there. But because we're small, proportionally, even if we had a bad run, that might have been enough. But gosh, America needs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of that kind of product, which would be a lot harder to actually physically get your hands on. So it might have been a time where our size really helped us, perhaps.
I think our size and the fact, and it helped us in many ways, I think. So I agree with you, we didn't need as much of this stuff. But also because we're a small size, everyone kind of knows each other and can talk to each other and get stuff done. The ability for us to move at speed, I mean, we ordered and got stuff on flights and boats coming here in terms of PPE well before Australia. I was talking to the Australians and I was talking to the Americans. We were ahead of them in the queue. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have only been waiting a few weeks. We could have been waiting several months before we got our orders in the queue if we hadn't moved at speed. And I ran I didn't run, but I was involved in a conference call where we got a whole bunch of doctors on the front lines in New York and Europe and so on to talk to the Ministry of Health here to share with them their experience of what they were seeing, because they clearly had big problems in their countries.
Yeah.
We weren't seeing issues here, so we wanted to see, is there things we could learn from their experience? And this doctor who was on the front lines in New York was saying for the first 3 or 4 weeks in New York, they were being issued one mask a week as doctors, and they were having to take it home each day and wash it in their washing machine and put it on and wear it. Whereas, we were provisioning, and we had the capacity for people to have, 8 to 10 masks a day.
Wow.
If they're working in the health system. So that just shows the value and the implication of being able to do some of these things at speed versus the alternative that was plainly evident in places like New York.
It's also really nice to hear business being involved there as well. So often we hear in societal conversation about how business is the thing that drains and uses and abuses people and doesn't pay people enough money. We need a living wage and all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of that, but what we don't often hear is the opposite side of that conversation. And I believe often, most of us would probably agree that you hear these arguments at the extremities and the truth is normally somewhere in the middle. And that seemed to be a lovely example you just gave of how business got involved and helped the whole country out. And without those businesses with that money, or those individuals like Stephen Tindall with that money, then they wouldn't have had the opportunity to help the whole country get through this. So it's quite nice to have that at least out there, if nothing else.
Yeah, I agree. And, I felt, I came away from this whole experience thinking, for a whole range of reasons, I'm glad I live here in New Zealand versus some other places in the world. And, I saw many examples of that. There was a Sam Morgan and Stephen Tindall. So Stephen funded a food initiative to hoover up kind of donated and leftover food, and that's continuing. And ultimately, I helped to facilitate the government putting some money into this initiative as well. But anyway, in April, when people were in lockdown, and a number of people had already lost their jobs by that point of time, this initiative that they funded provided 1.5 million meals, free meals out to people in around New Zealand. And I didn't see the final numbers for May, but I think they did over 2 million meals in May and so on, because all the traditional food banks weren't working when people were locked down, because there was no way for them to get donations and all that kind of stuff. So they were working. This food network was working with iwi and Salvation Army and others to get food out into these communities in need. And there's a lot of really cool stuff being done that, as I say, I felt proud and privileged in some way to be a part of some of those initiatives. In a country like New Zealand, we got a sense that everyone really did embrace this notion of being in this thing together and supporting each other.